Hi, I'm David Huboi. You're watching Going Green TV. Welcome to our show. And this show is sponsored by the San Benito County Chamber of Commerce. Our mission is environmental sustainability along with economic vitality. You know, in Vietnam, urban design comes from a central source. Paved and built environments come prescriptively without a lot of red tape or grassroots participation. Our in-house water expert, Shawn Novack, and I will be chatting with Scott Sjulin, an environmental consultant who has recently toured and researched the region on this afternoon's shoot of Going Green. Hey, Scott, welcome back.
Hey, thanks.
Good
Welcome,
to see
Scott.
you. Yeah.
Okay. Nice to be back on the show.
Great. And for those of you that did not see our previous show, a little bio on Scott. He's has an undergraduate degree from UC Davis, and it's in economic development and environmental policy. And you worked 7 years as an environmental consultant, is that correct?
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
Okay. And that environmental consultant was in planning and environmental review, along with water resources compliance. That's a show that unfortunately my co-host missed. But we talked about construction, general permitting, and stormwater quality on that show, and now you've applied for a Master's of Business Administration.
Yeah, and it's I've applied to some specific specialized programs where it's an MBA dual degree with sustainability emphasis. Mm-hmm. And my hope is to work in strategic sustainability consulting. So I'd be working with companies to look at their marketing strategies and, you know, related to sustainability and also energy and resource use.
Imagine that's a burgeoning field right now.
It is,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
There's a lot of need for it, and it's kind of an exciting way to transition my previous work.
Wonderful.
Okay. So while you're waiting to hear about your application, you've been doing some traveling, I understand.
That's correct.
And you went to Vietnam. This is the second, you just recently toured Vietnam for the second time.
Yes.
Can I ask you, Scott, why you would pick Vietnam as a place to travel to?
Well, I had a lot of friends that were Vietnamese American while I was at UC Davis, and there was an opportunity a couple of times. Those friends went over to Vietnam to visit some family and tour the country, and I decided to go with them because it was a chance to go with some people I knew and to see a new place.
What a great way to see it.
Yeah.
And we're going to, first of all, give us a little history of the country, and then we'll talk about the specifically planning environmental regulatory conditions there. So maybe you could share with the viewers a little bit about the history of the country of Vietnam.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about Vietnam after the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. During the Vietnam War, the country was divided into South Vietnam, which was a country that was allied with the United States, and then North Vietnam was the communist government country. In 1975, the North defeated the South and unified as one country. The initial policies in the first 10 years of that were agrarian economy and sort of central planning. And then in 1985, the country realized that it needed to be more of a socialist-oriented market economy. And so it began opening its doors a bit to foreign investment and also creation of larger scale firms instead of small agrarian enterprises. And then in the past 30 years or so, there's been a gradual opening and freeing of the market in Vietnam, but still remaining as sort of a centrally planned government.
So that was spurred more by economics than any philosophical changes, right?
I'd say so.
Yeah.
There's definitely a poor economic performance in that first 10 years.
A lot of high inflation there in the early 80s, I understand, too.
High inflation, and then just low productivity and inability to trade with a lot of partners.
So the current economy then, my understanding is 40% is industrial manufacturing,
That's correct.
30% tourism, and 20% agriculture,
Yeah.
and 10% other sectors and services.
Yeah.
So the government now, the way it's set up, it has a central planning focus. And there's three big sectors. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about those, what those sectors are.
Well, we'd mentioned industrial tourism and agriculture, and first with industrial, a big push in the country is to create centrally planned industrial zones throughout the country. And so these are sort of master planned areas where they lay a lot of infrastructure, sort of with the philosophy, if you build it, they will come. So we put in the roads and, you know, the water infrastructure, you know, with the hope that businesses would locate there. So that's kind of a big development push.
When we talk about roads, a lot of the people there do not drive cars. So the existing roads are, I would say, relatively narrow, aren't? Am I correct? Because of the modes of transportation that is there?
Well, in these industrial pre-planned areas, they are basically starting from scratch, and so they're building roads specifically to accommodate truck traffic or, you know, automobiles as well.
So by the government's providing incentives by building these hubs, right? Is there any other incentives for the manufacturers as far as tax breaks or maybe breaks on rent or when they build these things to get them started? Or
there are tax breaks and property tax breaks and tax increment financing, kind of not that much similar or not that much different than what we have in the United States.
Yeah, I was just kind of interested in that.
And the way the country is structured, the geographical structure is structured into provinces. And there's the talk about the central governing agency, the ministry. Let's talk a little bit about how that planning process comes in effect.
Sure, yeah. So there's different provinces and also city-states, and then those are further subdivided into various jurisdictions. But none of the jurisdictions really have any, you know, autonomous authority or regulations. It's just simply they're sort of branches of the central government that are taking directives from the central government and sort of implementing them on a local scale.
Do they have specialty areas, like this area does like iron manufacturing and this area does like grows cotton or anything like that? Or?
Definitely there's different parts of the country that, you know, for example, the Southwest is a big rice growing region. The central area grows a lot of coffee, manufacturing. Yeah, they're the second biggest coffee exporter.
Okay. So going back to what you were talking about, there's no local authority or control in this process.
No.
No planning commissions, no city councils, nothing like that.
Nothing like that. The only thing is that local individuals in these elected councils that, you know, report to the central government do have the ability to provide local input, but it's very much kind of has to balance with the, you know, the central government's, you know, reigning plan. There's not a lot of ability to, you know, make change, and it's all done by officials making those, you know, kinds of requests versus, say, individuals having the ability to speak or provide input.
And I know that there's a mountainous region where a lot of the poor people live. The demographics, I think 64 are impoverished. And traditionally they would build their little homes without permits, whatever materials they can find. So now we're looking at urbanization of that country on a large scale. So what happens to these people that are living out on the outskirts, like in Hanoi? What happens to them?
Well, you're talking about in the northern part of Vietnam.
The northern part, right.
There are people that were previously pretty far away from the city, but as the city's expanded out, it's encroached in those areas. And typically people are relocated if their areas are developed, you know, and the relocation might be into high-rise, high-density housing. And one of the trips I took to Vietnam, I did travel through some of that government housing where people are relocated, and folks are still kind of retaining practices that, you know, are more akin to a rural lifestyle despite being in, you know, that high density housing, you know, just maybe still stringing clothes out on a clothesline or
Because it's a learning curve coming from a hut into this concrete building, a high-rise building, where they're being translocated to.
Yeah, absolutely. You could definitely say that.
Okay, let's talk about the decision makers on this. The central government agency that is prescribing these infrastructure areas to create this urbanization of the country. My understanding, we were talking about this earlier, that some of these quote-unquote decision makers have actually gone and traveled to other worlds, other countries, not worlds, but countries, Caltrans, that could be a world itself.
Oh, so you're
Right.
referring to,
Yeah.
and I'll talk about this, that,
Yeah.
people in these, there's different, the government is divided, the central Vietnamese government is divided into ministries. That's what they're referred to, so like Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Planning, etc. And folks in those positions have oftentimes been educated in other countries or traveled to other countries to see how their agencies function and how the processes work. And people in the transportation ministry in Vietnam have met with Caltrans officials in California to look at how they develop highways versus how Vietnam could develop them.
So that's where they get their education then, and then they have a vision, and they say, this is what we want, this is what we see as a regional vision for our country, and that's what their implementation idea is. Now we're implementing it with putting in the infrastructure and then inviting foreign countries to invest.
Well, and that's one thing
creating that environment.
I wanted to mention. So the planning and development in Vietnam is kind of planned centrally by the Ministry of Planning and Investment and also the Ministry of Construction. But there's also a Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment that kind of does projects with countries around the world. The countries will invest money in Vietnam for environmental regulatory pilot studies, and that's another way that the country learns, and people in the country kind of develop projects influenced with international perspectives.
What is there in terms of the environmental policy that they have? What are their concerns? Because a lot of that country is at a low sea level where there's a lot of rice paddies, okay? Are they concerned at all about global warming where the sea level might rise?
That's a very big concern. And there have been pilot studies with, I believe it was Belgium and possibly Germany. Vietnam's Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment has partnered with a couple of countries to look at ways to reduce energy usage to kind of offset global warming, because they are definitely concerned about the sea level rise, because the largest city in the country, Saigon, which is in the south part of Vietnam, a significant, even a slight sea level rise of a few meters would put a lot of that city underwater. Not to mention some very, as you mentioned, in the southernmost part of Vietnam, the very productive rice paddy areas would also get inundated.
Yeah.
I would imagine some of these international outfits would probably have strings attached to either their services or money that they're lending them and say, we will help you, but you need to be concerned about this environmental issue. We see a lot of that going on.
I think that definitely it is a bit of like a piecemeal environmental effort that is led a bit by, monetary partners, in the sense that certain things are prioritized more than others because there was a country or an entity that funded that certain.
And they have
aspect.
rules that they wanted them to follow.
Or either rules or specific directives in the study. As an example, there's a lot of water quality research done in Vietnam, but not a lot of air quality stuff yet that's been done.
Well, as soon as they're go from 10% cars to 80 or 70% cars, then they may get some concern about air quality.
Yeah.
When they emulate the United States,
Yeah. Well, and you're bringing up a good point, is that one of the big environmental planning concerns of the future is how to deal with, an increasing middle class and, a population that's transitioning from motor scooters as primary means of transportation to automobiles.
Right.
And they're rapidly, frantically almost trying to create good public transit and mass transit in the larger urban areas to encourage people to ride subways or, take the bus instead of, automobiles everywhere.
But as far as the job sector goes, is it mainly bureaucracies that are hiring people, or is there a lot of private sector jobs?
There's been an explosive amount of private business just because of the opening of these public-private partnerships and different foreign direct investment, and then allowing greater presence of private enterprises in order to enhance certain sectors, especially tourism and industrial development. Those are very much led by private sectors.
From the first time you visited Vietnam to this last time that you went, have you seen a lot of change there? Because it seems to me that the way they approach urban planning is a quick and run process. And they're probably, in terms of getting these projects done, the speed, am I correct to say that, have you noticed any change from the first time that you visited there to your last visit?
Well, we can talk about the projects, but probably the biggest change that I noticed, and my first trip was in 2013, was that I told people that, I was in the environmental consulting field, and people struggled to really understand what that was. And, you flash forward a couple of years, and there's a much bigger push for environmental directives in the country. It's almost like the country's woken up a bit.
So that's coming internally, not from externally.
I would imagine that externally, the funding sources kind of have helped drive some of these projects, but I think that people are kind of aware that, if they don't make changes, they're going to be dealing with some pretty serious consequences.
What kind of consequences?
Things like a rise in sea level or loss of agricultural land, or, eventually air quality with the,
Were you able to talk to the average person without too much trouble? Was there screeners like they have in these countries, or were your friends able to act as intermediaries? Or
well, I think that talking about topics like the environment or things like that, they're not taboo. It's things that people are talking about, on a more regular basis. Because that just sort of talking about the environment and wanting to make change is not the same as, say, wanting to overthrow the government.
well, from the people you talk to, do they seem to be happy with the direction the country's going in, or do they feel good about things, or is there major concerns? Or
I think people, because some of the people I talked to were in more rural areas, are concerned with urbanization taking away some of their, individual characteristics.
well, we see that here. So
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing.
Is the focus, though, is from agrarian to now industry?
Mm-hmm.
So the people that were culturally, they were into the agrarian way of living, now they're kind of going through this learning curve.
And then also we're even transitioning further to a service-based economy too, and that's even a bigger learning curve.
With this transformation that's taking place here of the country of Vietnam, in the precedent of, and I always look at countries or cities as having some kind of character that as a precedent, am I safe to say probably that with old buildings that they have there pretty much don't have too much merit? They're going to be paved over for this new industrial, urbanized
I think
country.
that buildings with legitimate historical significance that are kind of, older than 50 or 60 years ago, probably will be preserved, but the average home or business in the country is probably under 50 years old, just because of the amount of damage during the war. There was a lot of reconstruction. So things like a private residence or a business is not really ever going to be considered historic.
And I would imagine there's some ambivalence about the past because of the war and then the French colonial period. It's not like they're proud of that, right?
Well, there's definitely, it depends on who you ask, because there's also people that are, you know, don't like the fact that the North took over the South. They still, and then there's
Imagine.
people that also, you know, don't like the French colonial period either. There's a lot of different opinions, but it's definitely true that, you know, building anew does sort of wash away those differences and that animosity in the past.
Okay, so let's compare the process, the central approach, the prescriptive approach of in Vietnam of urban design, as compared to how we're doing it here in this country. Let's talk about the advantages and the disadvantages. One advantage that I see is time, and you don't have the bureaucracy, the red tape, the amount of regulation that we have and the process that we have in this country. Am I correct? Would you say that?
That's definitely true. You know, big projects get done a lot faster, you know, a lot more efficiently, at least in terms from an administrative standpoint. So that is one positive of having a more centrally planned system. I'd also say a few others is that you don't have people that are self-centered, people or say businesses that are self-centered in their interests, that are trying to stop projects.
Shall I say NIMBYism?
NIMBYism, yeah. You
Okay.
just don't really have that not in my backyard,
Backyard, yeah.
syndrome. You
Right.
know, because those individual voices, you know, are kind of put on the back burner for, you know, kind of the collective good, you know.
Or not even heard at all. There are no community
Absolutely,
workshops, no
yeah.
community participation, and no site-specific tweaks in that design.
Yeah.
Am I correct to say that?
Yeah, everything site specific is just purely on a permit basis, you know, just making sure that the building stands, and actually that they are starting to check environmental stuff related to that, but
About building stands, okay, building codes.
building codes,
You know,
yes.
yeah. Here we have, if you want to build a building in the state of California, you have CalGreen, you have the California Building Code, International Building Code, you have Title 24 codes. I mean, you have this myriad of codes. So, I would guess to say that they have somewhat of a quasi-international building code they use.
Yeah, and then also projects are being screened more now for, you know, do they affect water quality or things like that. You know, there's starting to be some of that type of screening too, but there's no site-specific aesthetic analysis or
There's
how it
nothing that
impacts
comes
people.
down from the organic way of
grassroots,
designing.
yeah.
The grassroots. Where are the views? Where are the geography? How is that going to affect this building? Peculiarities of the site. Nothing like that.
None of that. And so there, you know.
So it may not work, and it may in a collective sense, that type of design process may work to a certain extent, but there might be some failures here and there done.
And you know, that's leads us into the cons, is that, you know, you don't have those kind of site-specific or individual stakeholders addressed. And then, you know, another overarching thing is that with a centrally planned government relying a lot on outside funding for some of these projects, you know, it's kind of being steered more by funding than, you know, perhaps a comprehensive look.
And the common person that lives there in this kind of process, it's forced. So do they feel like I don't think they would feel like they're stakeholders in that process. It comes from it's other directed.
Yes, but then they might also, you know, see the projects being built quickly and see the, you know, kind of development and growth as maybe a positive thing.
Well, I imagine the whole culture is different, obviously, than ours. When, you know, in China, it's about the collective good rather than the individual good. And I'm sure
Right.
there's some of that philosophy there, I would imagine.
There's definitely more of a collective.
And from a collective standpoint, do you think that the standard of living, you know, is improving from this type of process, or maybe
I
not?
think that, you know, things like they've got pretty decent water quality in a lot of places. You know, transportation is a lot better than it was. You know, it's easier to get around. So
Are people happier there?
Yeah.
That is, that's a hard question. I don't know if I would.
How do you quantify that, right?
Yeah, it's hard to,
Smiles?
yeah. I think it's people are happy no matter what, or they're
Uh-huh.
not happy. It's sort of,
It depends.
You're
right?
born
Yeah.
that way a lot of the time.
I know you're a very happy person.
That's because I hang out with guys like you.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you have to respect their culture. I mean, it's a different culture, different way of living, and
Definitely.
it's hard to sometimes maybe get a gauge on that, if they're
Very
happier
much.
with this transformation in their country brought about by central planning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, hey, anything else that you wanted to share with the viewers on your?
Well, we heard the good
Time
news that
remaining
your daughter got into UC Davis.
Yeah,
so
bravo.
congratulations.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
My daughter Carmen.
Yeah, fellow Aggie. So.
For some reason, she's got a lot of graphic ability, but her chosen field is psychology.
Well,
Which,
after living
I'm
with you
very-
your whole life, I can understand why.
Thank you, Sean. I set you up for that one.
Yeah, you did.
Oh, that's
Yeah, well, and the time remaining, I just want to say, is there, in your future, any other countries that you want to travel to in the future and see how they go about their infrastructure and urban planning?
probably South America is next on the list.
I'd like to talk to you sometime about, you went to a lot of states in our own country and how things differ from one side of the country to the other, and there's a lot of difference.
There is a
There
lot of
is,
variation.
yeah.
Yeah, like Texas and California, for example.
Well, or just really quickly,
Yeah.
I was recently in Arkansas, and they're all about mixed use and revitalizing downtowns there.
It's
and,
awesome.
you
I'm
know,
all behind that.
people, people wouldn't necessarily assume that, just not knowing anything about Arkansas.
Right.
But it's
Yeah,
pretty
but in
cool.
our country, it's a total different context than
Well.
what a war-ravaged country of
Sure.
Vietnam.
And we're all about
which
the
is
individual too,
trying to
let's face it.
Step
You
it
know,
up,
right? We're all about the individual,
Yeah,
right?
we're all about the individuals in this country.
especially when it's
Yeah.
in your backyard.
Thank goodness
Yeah.
that we have a democracy here, and that we have individuals can participate in that process, where they cannot.
We're coming up to
in
July
Vietnam.
4th, so we can
Hey, I want to
celebrate.
thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, it was great being
Good
on
to see you again,
Thank you,
Scott.
Scott.
Yeah, good
Yeah,
talking to you.
and
Yeah, I hope you check in with us once in a while, because you sound like you've
Right.
got a lot of
Yeah, let us
perspective
know.
that's
Let us
beyond
know
our
about
county.
the NBA.
Yeah, I definitely would love to
So-
come back and let you know how the program's going.
And we're having such a good time with Scott Sjulin here. I call him, in fact, I've got a nickname for him, Shu. And, Shawn O, my co-host here. I want to close by a couple of things here. First of all, Shawn wants to talk a little bit about water conservation. Shawn?
Thank you, Big D. Yeah, I want to tell the people in Hollister, I'm really happy with the conservation efforts that most of the community is doing. We got our reduction figures for May and June from both the city of Hollister and Sunny Slope. Well, the city of Hollister, I don't have it for June yet, but in May, we reduced water usage 29% compared to 2013 in May. And then the city's about 27% reduction in the month of May compared to 2013. I don't have the city's figures for June, but Sunny Slope was 34% of water reduced from 2013 in June. So way to go, people. But I just want to remind you the water regulations are in full force. We're getting into July and August, which is our peak irrigation time. So we really have to be diligent. My agency is here to assist you. Excuse me. And make sure if you need help, you can call me at 637-4378. And again, that number is 637-4378, because we all need to keep it tight between July and August. So, but thank you, and continue the good work.
Okay, thank you, Shawn. And thank you, community. And we're heading into the 4th of July celebration, so I got a couple of patriotic quotes to leave you with. This one is from Walt Whitman. Without enough wilderness, America will change. Democracy, with its myriad personalities and increasing sophistication, must be fibered and vitalized by regular contact with outdoor growths. Animals, trees, sun, warmth, and free skies, or it will dwindle and pale. That's from Walt Whitman. And my final quote from Catherine Bates. Oh, beautiful, for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. God bless America. We'll see you next time on Going Green.